Hope we all have a great time in Paris. I can't give you any advice at all there. Marianne just tapped my arm, which indicated stop. Marianne reminds me that I do not remember the name of the German general who commanded the German troops in Paris, but he received orders from Adolf Hitler that Paris must be totally destroyed before the Germans moved out. And he said, if you can't do anything else, just bomb the place, but be sure that all of the attractions there are destroyed. And the general, who probably had some sense that maybe he still had a future, apparently decided, I do not want that on my resume. So he ignored that, and the British underground, or the French underground people negotiated through a priest with the general, and finally agreed that the Germans would withdraw. Now, they didn't withdraw quite that simply. There still was a lot of fighting between small groups. Over 2,000 French people were killed during that time, and probably many Germans and some Americans. But fortunately, all of Paris survived except one great tragedy. The wine-making factory, whatever, was blown up and burned. And they said it took them almost a week to replace the wine.
Sober for a week.
Yeah.
Must have been awful.
Carver, tell about your experience in Paris.
Well, I refuse to tell about my experiences in Paris. I did myself enough damage last night. Well, I did have one encounter with the black market. I put this in my book, so most of you know it. I'll do it quickly, but I was walking back to the place where I stayed up in the Montmartre, and a couple of Frenchmen came up to me, and in their rather broken English indicated that they were interested in acquiring any American uniforms that I might have that I wasn't using. And it just so happened that when I was in England, I had walked into a quartermaster tent that was, there was nobody there but me. So I did what any self-respecting GI would do. I acquired an extra field jacket and some shirts and trousers and other items, and in case I would need them, and carried them around with me, and decided here's a good chance to get rid of them. And I went to a friend of mine who also was in that same situation, so I agreed that I would meet these two fellows with the black market the next day. And then my friend and I, we put on all our clothes, so we looked like we'd gained about 40 pounds, because this was strictly illegal. And being the future Methodist minister who's already robbed the priest at the point of a gun, we went out and we met. This time there were more than two black marketeers, and as I said in my book, they looked like they've been dressed by Warner Brothers. They absolutely looked like black marketers would look in Paris. And so we had made a deal, and they asked us to follow them. We followed them down several winding streets. You know how quickly you can get lost in a French village. Well, this was Paris, and I had no idea where I was. But we finally arrived in front of a building, and we started negotiating the price of the stuff we had to sell. We agreed on a price, and then they said, well, follow us. So we walked down a dark alley, into the back door of the building, up a winding staircase, and into a big room. And there we delivered our merchandise, and they paid me half what we'd agreed on. And this was a one of the first serious crisis moments in my life. Do I accept half price and get the heck out of here as quick as we can? Because there were about a dozen black marketers standing around now. And yes, they had knives in their belts. But my friend and I decided that if we're going to leave here alive, we probably might as well, have as much money as we can. And if we're not, let's go with honor. So we refused to leave without being paid. And the head of the black marketers looked at me for a moment, smiled, reached in his pocket, gave me the rest of the money, then opened a pack of cigarettes and offered me one. So my friend and I took a cigarette and left as quickly as we could. And that was my one and only encounter with the black market. But I did go home with a tidy profit. There really isn't much I can tell you about Paris. It's a wonderful city. Oh yes, Marianne is, she's got notes here and she keeps reminding me. With General de Gaulle, old Georgie Patton, he wanted to take Paris like everything else. He was all ready to go rip snorting through Paris, and Eisenhower said, no, we're going to let the French recapture Paris. So I brought up General Leclerc's division and made arrangements for a rather formal and pageant-like arrival in Paris. There's a story that Georgie Patton managed to take some back streets and get there up onto the reviewing stand. So the French, who felt that they were sort of the first allies to arrive, looked up there and there's Patton waiting to be saluted. But anyway, then the Americans marched through, and I cannot tell you the number of the division. I remember what I did at one time. But anyway, General de Gaulle arrived and rather majestically strolled down the Rue de Rivoli, and at some point some Germans opened fire and everybody in Paris hit the ground except de Gaulle, who didn't flinch. He was about 6'8". He's about Bob Marley's size, and he didn't flinch at all. He just stood there, and that kind of made his reputation. And he went on, of course. The Americans had then arranged some artificial money to be used as a medium of exchange, and de Gaulle said, baloney to that, I'm not having anything to do with it. He said, I'm going to run this city. And so General Eisenhower reported this back to General Marshall, who was Eisenhower's superior back in the States. And Marshall said, you can't let him do that. You must take over the running of Paris. And Marshall said, you don't know de Gaulle. So they sat down and agreed, and it turned out that the one general, an American general, that General de Gaulle really liked was Eisenhower. And so Eisenhower backed off and let de Gaulle take over the administration of the city of Paris. And that's when a whole new era in history began then. So de Gaulle and Eisenhower and I kind of collectively saw to things in Paris.